Also, your host right now, at least. I'm Jim Dempsey. I'm Director of Development at SouthLight.
I'm Christina Brewer. I'm the Senior Director of Administration for SouthLight.
All right, and now here's Dr. Hazel. I'm going to spotlight her real quick. Take it away, Dr. Hazel.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks, Jim and Christina, and thank you for everyone that's joined us. So I'm gonna just take a couple minutes to tell you about SouthLight. And I'm still learning. I've been the Chief Medical Officer for 7 months, and I'm still learning about all the wonderful things that are happening. And I know that's kind of my place is great, but that's actually how I feel. It's an amazing team of clinicians and providers and administrators coming together with a common goal and making helping our community heal and be well. We're a nonprofit organization providing outpatient services for both mental health and substance use, which is rare. We're unique because we get to do both. And we notice in the community and in this line of work that we do, that those go hand in hand, mental health and substance use. And so we are uniquely poised to do both. And we have an amazing group of people that work to doing that. We've been doing it for 53 years, which is fantastic. And we offer a continuum of care. So that includes peer support, there's housing, we have a women and children's program. So there are a lot of social determinants of health. And so we try to wrap our arms around clients because they're not just, it's not just one thing that's affecting their lives. There's mental health, there's substance use, there's housing, there are lots of things that impact them. And so we try our best to kind of work toward addressing those issues. So that's a little brief snippet about SouthLight. And now I'm going to introduce our speakers. And I know Jim has done that. So we've got Katie, who's our Director of Clinical Performance, and she's a licensed mental health counselor. And we've got Beth Fitzenheimer, who is our Clinical Training Director. She keeps us all straight with all the trainings that we need to do. And she's a licensed clinical addiction specialist. So they have a lot to share with us, and we want to leave time for questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Beth.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Hazel, and thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We are so excited to get to have this conversation. This is something that I think many of us worry about or think about in our work lives, our personal lives, and so Beth and I are hoping to give you just some couple tips and some things to think about as you come across folks who may be struggling. So let's jump in to thinking about how do we even tell if someone is struggling, right? We all have things that are hard. Life is hard. But how can you tell if someone that you care about or that you work with in your life is having a hard time? So what does it look like? Oftentimes we think about, right, if a lot of times we're struggling, it's something happening internally, and we don't, sometimes there's fear of making assumptions or anything of that nature. And so we're just going to start with what it might look like. I'm going to actually jump and start at the second bullet because I want this to be a real highlight for us to remember is that all behavior is communication. All behavior is communicating something. And so, you may notice that someone that you care about is having a pretty quick or sudden or even gradual, really, change in behavior over time. In the workplace, you may notice that a colleague is typically prompt or even early. Maybe they, typically are a believer that if you're on time, you're late. That's how my dad was. And then all of a sudden, you've noticed over time, they may start arriving to work later and later. Or someone who is typically really optimistic, maybe is a little more muted or less so, maybe a little more to themselves, not as gregarious. That may be a sign and I think a lot of those are typical signs that we think about. But also you may notice that someone who maybe is a little quieter actually becomes more gregarious, more involved, more outspoken, which could, right, that's where you get a little nervous about, are things actually going really well and they're getting comfortable in their role or in this relationship? But also sometimes that may be a compensation for a challenging event, or nervous energy because there's so much stuff going on that I'm going to try to put this side of me forward. So when we're thinking about what's going on, especially maybe as a supervisor or a manager, if you're noticing somebody on your team isn't quite themselves or, had a sudden shift in behavior, or even over time, you've noticed over the last few months, that would be a sign that maybe we want to start checking in on them. We may want to see what's going on and maybe start preparing or thinking about just having a conversation to, sometimes I even call them temperature checks, right? Just to see how someone is doing. So if we're thinking about all behavior as communication, thinking through what could this person be communicating to me in their behavior. So I'm going to turn it over to Beth to kind of, once we've kind of identified that, to talk about what's next.
Hi, thank you, Katie. How many of you have ever asked this question, right? Like, what can I do? I see this person struggling. I can tell that something is wrong, but what can I do? So this is probably a situation that all of you have found yourselves in. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be here if you knew the answer to this question. But it can be really tricky. So does anyone want to say out loud or pop in the chat how it feels to be in the situation where you see someone struggling and you don't know what to do?
It feels overwhelming, especially if you don't have the answers to some of the needs and struggles and crises that they are currently going through.
Yeah, overwhelming is a really good word for it. Anyone else, how does it feel to see someone struggling and not really know what to do or say?
I can say that when it pertains to work, it's much easier for me to find the language to communicate that. But when it's a more personal relationship, it tends to be more challenging to approach it more objectively, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Anyone else want to add either out loud or in the chat how it feels or your experience with having this thought?
I can say I feel helpless at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Being the executive director for an all women's organization, and being a guy, I don't always know how to approach things, but yeah, it can feel helpless at times. But I want to help, and being a guy, I want to solve everything, but I know I'm not always here to solve the problem. Listen more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a good word.
All right, let's see. I see something in the chat.
It can feel heavy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Really good, you guys. Thank you. So when we are in this spot of we have identified that someone is struggling, their behaviors are different, they're different emotionally, or their energy is different, sometimes we don't know what to do next. And so Katie and I today are going to talk to you a little bit about having the conversation, taking that next step to hopefully break us free from this place of feeling overwhelmed, stuck, powerless, hopeless. So Katie will kind of tackle this next part.
Yeah, so we want to talk about what happens before we have the conversation, right? I think so oftentimes we find ourselves in kind of like, oh, it's the moment. This is my chance. I need to talk right now. And then I don't know if any of you have ever felt this. I'm hoping some of you have, because I have. Some, if I'm alone in it, that's cool. But when I kind of feel like, oh, this is sprung on me right now, I have to do this, then all of a sudden, all of my words go away. And I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm stammering or I'm stuttering. And then I get in my head about that, right? Like how is this person going to feel like they can tell me what's going on when I panic. The good news is actually that's a very normal thing for your brain to do when your body is out of whack and you start having those symptoms of panic and anxiety. Your brain is going to also feel that. So if that's you, don't worry. That is a very normal experience. However, in a conversation like this, right, especially if it's a conversation where we so truly want to help somebody and reach out, we want to be that, almost like that rock, right? That support system for somebody. And so a conversation like this, or really any difficult conversation, really benefits from some planning ahead of time, right? So here are some things that we could think about ahead of time. Thinking about when and where we're going to have this conversation, right? Even if that's something that just kind of happens spur of the moment, if we've thought ahead of time of, okay, so I know that there's 2 offices at work that are generally empty. I could easily say, hey, let's go over here and chat for a second, right? We probably don't want to have this conversation in the break room or in between offices where there's usually a lot of people and a lot of conversation happening. So knowing kind of where you feel comfortable, but where it could also be a space where that other person could feel comfortable. Similarly, knowing, okay, I usually see this person when we're going for a walk at the park, or suggesting, you know what, maybe I could feel comfortable having this conversation if I invite them to go on a walk with me, or invite them to a coffee shop that we both love that's usually a little quieter, near the office or near our homes, if it's someone in your personal life. So thinking about when and where, and when, you know, time of day. So if you know this person really well, do you know that there's a time of day that they're usually more comfortable or more, you know, we all usually have a time of day that feels good for us. And maybe we feel more productive, or maybe open to having more conversations versus first thing in the morning where I can hardly get my brain on, let alone having a hard conversation, right? Just really kind of thinking about that. And when you're thinking about when and where, also think about a place where you can limit distractions, where we're not going to have a laptop up, or I'm not worried about carpool pickup. And so I could turn my phone over and not be looking at my phone, where I could really be intentional with this person. Again, if it's at work, thinking about, I know that I have a general time of day that usually gets a little busier where people need something from me more often. So, you know, is there a time of day that's generally more quiet, where I don't need to be necessarily on to get a lot of stuff done? Or also thinking about in your personal life, right? When can my partner handle the kiddos, or, you know, someone in my family, or, you know, when I could really be available and just be present, right? What really matters in conversations like this, and Beth and I are going to talk about this a few times, is authenticity, right? And being able to be present and engaged. And so thinking about when that's going to feel and be really most authentic, and you can limit your distractions and really be there with that person. And to be there with that person, you need to take a second to check in with yourself, check in with your head and your heart. Okay, because these conversations can be hard. It can be hard to catch that for somebody. And so thinking about your own needs, or, you know, okay, so regardless of what happens with this conversation, I know that when I can kind of return to my daily life, I have things that feel good. You know, I can go for a walk with my dog, or I can process ahead of time. And knowing that there's times that we want to be, excuse me, we want to be really present for people. But we got a lot going on too. And so, okay, again, kind of when and where. This week is really hectic. I can try to make it work here, but thinking about, okay, actually this time of day, all of my big meetings or big presentations are going to be later in the day or done for the day. And so I can be more focused then, and I'm not going to be distracted or worried about my stuff. And noticing that there may be times too that even in that moment, they think, oh, this is my moment. You know that your head and your heart are not going to be in the right space to be able to acknowledge, like, you know what, Beth, I definitely want to have a conversation with you about this. Can we plan a time, maybe tomorrow morning? I would love for us to go get coffee before work so we just can chat where there's not a lot of noise. That, you know, you can kind of do that head and heart prep ahead of time. So checking in with yourself, because that's okay. And that's important for you to be able to catch that and be that rock and support for the person you care about. And then also consider what you'd like to say, right? Again, kind of think about those words ahead of needing them. That's something that can usually help, even when, again, in the conversation, it's normal for those feelings of nerves to kind of kick up, right? Maybe a racing heart, sweating, a change in your breathing. So if we already kind of know what we'd like to say, then we don't really risk losing those words as much. So thinking about, sometimes knowing that, this person really responds when I kind of talk about what's going on with me, but then also not wanting to word vomit about yourself. I know there's probably more professional terms than that, but word vomit's what comes to mind for me. So thinking about, what are you comfortable disclosing, right? So I'm comfortable saying, gosh, this presentation that we had yesterday was really stressful for me. How are you feeling about that? Or I'm nervous about this upcoming deadline, or, oh my goodness, with summer coming up, it's so I'm looking forward to summer, but thinking about family plans, right, has my brain on overdrive. How about you? Thinking about what is a comfortable level of self-disclosure that you're comfortable sharing. Because again, if we're kind of just talking because we're nervous, then we may feel that head and heart might not be as checked in and ready to go because you're, again, worried about what you're saying, or maybe you're distracted, or, some of these other things that we already talked about can start to be a challenge. So in a way, all of this is really connected. So just thinking ahead of time, what do I want to convey? What is my message? What are some words that I feel comfortable using to convey this message to this person? Knowing that we may get hit with a curveball, but if we have an idea, it's a little bit easier to navigate that curveball because we've kind of already set a path. So we've checked in, I'm feeling good, I know when and where, I'm actually gonna leave my phone in my car, and I kind of have an idea of what I want to say. So now it's time to have that conversation. It's time to connect with that person. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Just super quick though, let's pause and see if anyone has questions or comments. Katie
Good
just
point.
gave a lot of really good information. So let's leave some space here in case anyone has a question or would like to ask for clarification on anything.
Or time you've maybe tried one of those things before.
Yeah. Yes. And I think maybe I'm the most curious about what y'all's thoughts are about checking in with your head and your heart. Making sure that you're in a good space to have the conversation, or perhaps if anyone has questions about how to get into that space, I think that's the part I'm the most curious about. But if my friends are all good, then we will keep going. I just want to make some space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In my experience, I have to be careful or mindful rather, if I'm especially worried about somebody else, whether it's actually me I should be worried about.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? Sometimes we can be so focused in on somebody else that really maybe they're kind of trucking along as normal, but it's something in us that is feeling maybe more stressed or more anxious, or Jim, that's a good point. And a really important part of that, checking your head and your heart. That's awesome.
Okay. You spot it, you got it. That's, yeah. All right, we will keep going. So how do I have the conversation, right? I've identified that I'm worried about someone. I have made sure to put thought into what I want to say and when and where is appropriate to have the conversation. I've made sure that I'm in a good headspace and heart space. And so now you're ready to have the conversation. So there are a couple of things that we want you to consider before you, or as you are talking with the person that you are concerned about. And again, these tips all apply for whether this is a work-related conversation or a conversation more related to your personal life. First off, know that you're going to have to be courageous. These conversations are uncomfortable or perhaps difficult, and there's a lot of uncertainty involved with these conversations. You don't always know how they're going to take what you're saying. You don't know how the conversation will go or how it could potentially affect your relationship in the longer run. So being courageous is a really important thing to be mindful of. So grab your courage, hold on to it, be connected to why having this conversation matters. And so when you are connected to the why, then moving through with the difficulty of the conversation can be a little bit easier to navigate. So being courageous, super important. Keeping in mind, Katie kind of touched on this with her part about self-disclosure. So sometimes self-disclosure is helpful or appropriate, and you're going to have to use your judgment on that based on the context, the setting, your relationship to the person, what your concerns with them are. And so sometimes self-disclosure can be really helpful to help the person feel safe and open up. And other times it can maybe not be as appropriate, or perhaps shift the focus away from the person onto you, which you don't want to do either. So with self-disclosure, feel that one out. When we are thinking about being direct, gentle, and clear, if you are vague with introducing or having this conversation, the person might not know what you're talking about, or you might leave wiggle room for them to exactly know what you're talking about, but skirt around it. And so when you are direct and gentle and clear, you're not giving the person any room to either misunderstand what you're saying or kind of sidestep the concerning issue at hand. So that might look like you identifying specific concerns that you have, or acknowledging certain behavioral changes or emotional changes that you have noticed in this person. So if it's a work example, then you might say, I've noticed that you've started being late to work and that's not like you. I'm really concerned. What's going on? Instead of just a general, are you okay? Should I be worried about you? Because then people will say, no, I'm fine. Everything's good. And then you don't have anywhere else to go for the rest of the conversation.
Beth, I want to interject real quick. So Beth just gave us an example, and she did something really, really well in it that we talk about a lot. And so I don't know how many of you have heard of I messages or I language. When we're talking about being direct and gentle, is that Beth started our conversation with, I've noticed that you've been a little late to work yesterday, and I'm a little concerned, right? It's something that Beth is noticing in herself about that person and speaking from her perspective. And so when we talk about that gentle but direct, right, we know exactly what the situation is, exactly the behavior, right, that we talked about before, versus if we just said, why are you so late to work all the time? Right, that's direct about what the problem is, but
yeah,
right, as the person receiving that, oh my goodness, I might start to feel a little on edge. And that might not be as gentle. Attentions can be good, right? Of course. But the I messages is a very common thing that we talk about a lot. And so, you know, I just wanted to point out that that's something that Beth does really naturally, but that is a really important piece to this little bullet. Sorry, Beth.
No, that's just fine. Thank you. Thank you. And so name the thing, right? Avoid being vague. Specifically list out what your concerns are, what you've noticed, and directly say that you are worried or concerned. And that comes back to what Katie talked about thinking about what you want to say, right? Have specific details to point out or specific concerns to identify, so that if the person says they don't know why you are concerned about them, you can have those details to point out. You can be direct and clear and straightforward while still being gentle, kind, and compassionate. And so make sure that you are able to incorporate all of that in your delivery. If you only focus on being direct and clear, you might lose sight of some of the gentleness or compassion. And if you are too focused on being gentle or compassionate, then you might lose some of your directness or clarity. And so just make sure that you are mindful and attentive to incorporating kind of both sides of that in your conversation that you're having with this person. We want to be curious in this conversation, right? All behavior is communication. And so we want to understand what's going on with this person because their behavior is either a direct result of something that they're dealing with or perhaps an attempt at meeting a need. And so we want to understand what is happening with them so that we then know a little bit more about what they need and perhaps how we can help or what resources to refer them to. And so as we are asking questions, we want to make sure that we are listening with presence and kind curiosity. So we're still limiting distractions. We're not looking out the window. We're not checking emails or on our phone. We're not hollering out the doorway to someone else. Hopefully the door is closed anyway, but you are present with them. So let's talk a little bit about what listening with presence and kind curiosity looks like. Does anyone want to take a stab at what this might look like? Or perhaps what it doesn't look like, if that is what comes to mind first. Anyone want to take a stab at what listening with kind curiosity looks like?
And if you're typing, you can feel free to unmute.
Either
No
way.
worries about
Yeah.
that.
So I'll get us started. You might be looking at the person with some eye contact, keeping in mind that like sustained, intense eye contact is maybe too much, but eye contact with the person as appropriate. You might be smiling or having a neutral face. Your facial expression should be aligned with what the person is sharing. So if they are sharing something painful, your face would either be neutral or have a face of like concern on. But your face is definitely in alignment with what the person is sharing. You're not responding right away. So you're being thoughtful. You're letting what they say kind of absorb before you respond. Also, silence can allow the person or give the person space to continue to share. And so you don't need to respond right away. You don't have to fire off the next question or make a comment or fix it right away. You can just kind of let the moment sit there while you are processing what they have shared.
And sometimes it's even appropriate to say, that is a lot.
Or
yeah. That kind of courageous vulnerability of saying, oh my gosh, I don't even really know how to respond right now.
Yeah.
You know, where someone can say like, okay, you know, that's a lot. You're right. That is overwhelming. Sometimes having those acknowledgements can kind of also let your brain think about what you want to say. But yeah, just taking a minute, silence, absolutely. All of those things. We don't have to have the answer to fix it before we even walk in the room.
And that's not really going to be your job, right? You are listening, you are creating space for them to share. And then in a moment, we'll talk about resources that you can refer folks to, but you are not expected to be kind of like a stand-in counselor. That would be outside of your scope. And so we're just listening. We're not really fixing or trying to address. When we're listening with presence and kind curiosity, we might be leaning forward. We all know how it feels to be talking to your partner or a close friend about something like big, and perhaps that person is not listening with presence and kind curiosity, and they're distracted or they're watching TV or they're just saying, yeah, we know how that feels. And so even creating the space to listen to someone with kind curiosity and with presence and with compassion can go a long way in helping kind of diffuse some of the heaviness that they're carrying or some of the pain that they're dealing with. I think that was a comment that I just saw pop up. Yeah, hearing, wow, that's a lot has been so helpful to hear. Yeah, just that sense of compassion goes a long way. And so we're listening, we're asking questions, we're being present. Sometimes it is appropriate to ask how you can help. Sometimes you can ask the person, what do you need from me? How can I support you? Sometimes that's helpful. Other times, and this is perhaps a little bit more relevant in some contexts or some situations than others, sometimes you can just directly offer a way to help. So if this is a personal relationship where you are concerned about the person, you might say, I will bring you dinner tomorrow night. Where would you like me to order it from? Instead of, let me know when you want me to bring you dinner. Or I will cut your grass this weekend so you don't have to worry about it. Katie gave the example earlier of like asking someone to go on a walk. That could be something that you offer. But other times it's more appropriate, just based on context, to kind of leave it open-ended of how can I support you, or what kind of help do you need? Does anyone have thoughts, questions, comments on having the conversation? This is the piece that most people are unsure about. So just kind of want to see if there are any questions, comments that folks have.
And one thought too, when it comes to asking versus offering for help, is thinking about your relationship with that person too, right? So if you know that their home is kind of their space, and they don't love having folks around, and they really need that time to themselves. Beth offered, one of her examples for offering was, I'm going to send you some dinner, right? Like that's still able to be at a space, at a distance, versus if it's someone that kind of craves that or appreciates that act of service or that time with somebody, then that might be a time to have maybe a more pointed offer. Or you could still offer, but it might be, again, like a walk, or do we want to go get coffee? I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee so we can talk more about this. So thinking about your relationship with that person, and if it's something that's a little more appropriate for like outside of their living space versus, I would love to cut your grass or do this thing for you, pick up your groceries if you want to put in an order, something of that nature, can sometimes help guide when you're thinking about whether you want to ask or offer.
Some of you may be having these conversations in a work environment, and you might run into, I guess in your personal life, this could happen too, but I'm thinking particularly at work, you might try to open the door to this conversation and the person might not want to talk to you. And so if you try to have this conversation and the person is not receptive, or they say that nothing is wrong, or they say, I'm not talking to you about this, then you just leave the door open and you say, okay, that's fine. Just know that I'm here for you if you want to talk later. You don't have to force it. You don't have to make it stressful by trying to be like, no, you're talking to me now, which none of you would ever do. But just know that there might be times where you try to have this conversation and the person is not ready or willing or able to have the conversation at that time. And so then the response would be, that's fine. I'm here for you if you want to talk. And if this is a conversation at work where the person perhaps is someone that you are supervising and they are definitely struggling and it is affecting their work performance, there might be a little bit less flexibility in, okay, that's fine. I'm here when you want it. And so in that case, you would just follow like whatever your place of employment's policies are about that. And so do you write them up? Do you put them on a PIP? Do you you would just default to whatever your organization's policies are around that. But in your personal life, you have more flexibility and you can just step back and leave the door open. Additionally, at work, sometimes it's more about creating an environment where folks know that they can talk to you over time. And so you may need to put in some effort in between these conversations so that if you are a supervisor or if you are kind of a manager of some place of employment, that you create this culture where your folks know that you care about them and where they know that they can talk to you. And that takes a little bit more time to build that environment. And so just be mindful that if you have not been creating that environment at work, it might take a little bit more to get the person to open up to you and trust you. Thoughts, questions, comments about this section?
And recognizing too, right, that this is a vulnerable conversation even on your end, and that there's so much courage and vulnerability. So kind of wrapping back up, right? Holding on to your courage, knowing that you can be courageous and vulnerable. They exist in the same space often.
Oh, Renee Brown, you guys. Mm-hmm.
And so that's okay. It is still courageous to have this conversation, and it's courageous to work on creating that environment like Beth just talked about. right? Even if it's recognizing that it's a shift in the environment, that takes a ton of courage.
Mhm. Resources. So when you are having this conversation, if the person agrees to talk to you about it and they do kind of acknowledge in this conversation, yes, I'm struggling about these things, or this is going on, or I don't know what to do, there are some resources that you can refer them to, because again, you are not expected to solve the problem. You are not expected to be their counselor if that's not your role. And so you can refer them to SouthLight. We serve folks who have insurance and who don't. And so you don't have to cross that hurdle to get services with us. And so you can give them our number. The National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a 988 number. And so you can give that number to anyone who is having thoughts about hurting or killing themselves. They can call this number and speak to professionals, people who have received training to kind of help talk them through that. There's the Hope Line. I'll talk about a few of these and then Katie can talk about a few. The Hope Line is a number where people can call if they're feeling lonely and want to talk. So the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is not for that purpose. You are in like peak crisis and they help you through that like crisis moment, that acute moment of crisis. The Hope Line is if you're just kind of feeling lonely, if you're feeling sad and want to talk, if you're struggling but not thinking about hurting or killing yourself, the Hope Line is a really good resource to share with people. Katie, you want to talk about the next few?
Yeah, sure. So NAMI has chapters around the country. So Wake County, we have a chapter. It's the National Association for Mental Illness. So they have a host of resources. So giving them a call and saying, I don't even know where to start. And sometimes these conversations with the person that you're caring about or talking to, maybe they don't know where to start. And something that could be a great offer for help is, hey, I have some phone numbers. Would it help if I called with you? Right, to have that person there to kind of help that conversation. They may say no, or they may say, I'll just have that phone number and I'll call on my own. But again, that'd be a great way. You know what? Sure. But if you want someone to sit there with you while you call, let me know. I'm happy to be that person. Alliance is the managed care organization for our catchment area. They manage Medicaid funds. And again, so they're connected to all the resources as well. They have a 24/7, access line. So giving Alliance a call, again, these are places that you can even call and say, I don't even know what to do or where to start or what I need. They're going to ask you questions to help you figure that out. If you are a veteran or the person that you care about is a veteran, the Veterans Crisis Line, you are able to call or text. And sometimes that's nice to have the ability to text and not have to talk. So that, and especially we may be out of our capacity to talk at that point. So the Veterans Crisis Line has a text line. And then SAMHSA has a national helpline as well. And something that I like to encourage folks to feel over-equipped instead of under-equipped is maybe you take a few of these and you plug them into your phone, or you plug them maybe onto a card on your desk or something, so that you, right in that moment, it's kind of that preparation ahead of time. You can say, you know what, I have some resources that I can help you with, instead of, there's so many resources. And I was at this thing this one time with these two people from SouthLight who were talking and I can't remember what they said. I have felt like that before, y'all. So, but to say, I've already got these that I'm going to give to you. And so that you're already, it's one thing to be able to have it and not need it, than need it and not have it. So that's something that I always recommend, is just go ahead and equip yourself. You never know when you might need it. Beth, if you want to talk about our last couple.
Yeah, really briefly. So mental health first aid is a course designed for people who are not helping professionals. So regular folks who don't have mental health or substance use education. It teaches you how to identify when someone is struggling, how to have the conversation, what resources. It's basically just like this for 6 hours. And that is a training that is available through Alliance. And so you can call them and ask them how to get linked up, or you can find it on their website. So if you want to have more training or more knowledge, information, resources on how to help people who are struggling, that is a really cool training to take. And if this is a work-related concern or crisis, don't forget to use the resources available through your place of employment. So a lot of places will have an EAP, which you can refer people to, but that will vary from place to place. Karen has put a link in the chat of our resources on our website, and we'll also follow up with an email with you guys with some of the links that we have shared today. So we've been kind of pausing for questions throughout, and I do realize we're out of time. But if anyone has questions, you can put them in the chat or ask them out loud. And if you need to hop off to your next thing, it was lovely to have you.
Hey, Beth and Katie, we want to say thanks so much for all your help and all your effort that you put into this. We really appreciate you. It's a great presentation. If everybody wants to unmute themselves and give Katie and Beth a round of applause, by all means, do it.
Thank you.
Or you can
Thank
put
y'all
it
for
in the chat.
coming.
Yeah, y'all were great. And just a couple notes real quick. So we have, you can visit SouthLight.org for more information about our organization, our programs and services. If you're looking for ways to get engaged, again, that's www.southlight.org. We have another webinar coming up on the 25th. It's going to be a conversation between Adam Hartzell, our CEO, and Dr. Letitia Hazel, who was with us earlier, our MCO, or our CMO rather. Yeah, Karen is dropping some links in the chat for you with more information on resources and more information on SouthLight. She's also going to be dropping a link to an evaluation. And you can let us know what you thought about this presentation. And also keep in mind that we recorded this and we will be sending out the recording to you so you can forward it to anybody that you would like to. So everybody, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate you all. And again, thanks so much for being with us today. We hope to see you on the 25th. Have a great day. See ya.